Can I ask you something? Have you ever met someone, and within the first few minutes, you could almost feel them pulling away? Not because you argued, not because you offended them. In fact, you barely spoke. Yet somehow, something had already changed. It's one of the strangest experiences in life. Someone you've only just met suddenly seems uncomfortable in your presence, and you spend the next few days wondering, did I do something wrong? The strange thing is, almost all of us ask the same question. Was it something I said? Did I come across the wrong way? Maybe they just didn't like me. And because we're decent people, we usually assume the problem started with us. Our minds are unbelievably creative. Give them one awkward interaction, and by bedtime they've written an entire documentary about it, complete with interviews, background music, and an ending where somehow everything was your fault. Sound familiar? Think about it. You can meet 10 different people in the same week, and every conversation feels completely different. One person relaxes around you almost immediately. Another seems genuinely interested in getting to know you. Someone else hardly notices you at all. And then, there's that one person. Nothing is wrong. Nothing awkward has happened. Yet somehow, they become strangely careful around you. Their smile looks polite, but not comfortable. Their words sound friendly, but somehow distant. It's almost like they've started answering a question that you never asked. Most of us don't stop there. We immediately become detectives. We replay every sentence, every smile, every handshake, every tiny pause, looking for evidence. Have you noticed how the human brain can turn a 2-minute conversation into a full-length investigation? Suddenly you're remembering things that probably never mattered. Maybe I sounded too confident. Maybe I talked too much. Maybe I didn't talk enough. If overthinking were an Olympic sport, some of us would have retired with several gold medals by now. But here's what I slowly realized. Maybe I was trying to solve the wrong mystery. That's when I came across something Carl Jung wrote, and I have to admit, I didn't fully understand it the first time I read it. He believed that we often react to other people, not simply because of who they are, but because of what they awaken inside us. At first, I thought, that's interesting. Then life kept showing me examples, and suddenly, those words stopped sounding like philosophy. They started sounding like everyday life. Imagine you're standing in front of a mirror first thing in the morning. The mirror isn't judging you. It isn't praising you. It isn't trying to embarrass you. It's simply reflecting what's already there. Sometimes, another human being can quietly do the same thing, without trying, without knowing, simply by being themselves. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. What exactly gets awakened inside an insecure person? Because it isn't hatred, at least not at first. It's something much quieter, and once you see it, you'll never unsee it. Let's imagine something together. Two people walk into the same room. One of them is calm, not loud, not trying to impress anyone, just comfortable being themselves. The other person notices them. At first, nothing happens. They smile politely. Maybe they even shake hands. Everything looks completely normal. But then, a quiet question slips into their mind. Why do they seem so comfortable? They don't say it out loud. In fact, they may not even realize they thought it. But that tiny question is often where the whole story begins. Here's something I find fascinating. Insecurity rarely says, "I wish I were more confident." It usually says something much quieter. Why aren't I like that? There's a difference. The first question creates growth. The second quietly creates frustration. Imagine two musicians listening to the same pianist. One leaves inspired. They think, "I can't wait to practice." The other leaves discouraged. They think, "I'll never be that good." The pianist didn't change. The music didn't change. Only the conversation inside each listener changed. That's how human beings work more often than we realize. Now here's the part that's easy to misunderstand. The first feeling usually isn't resentment. It isn't anger. It isn't even dislike. It's discomfort. A quiet, difficult to explain discomfort. Because suddenly, someone else's calmness shines a light on your own anxiety. Someone else's discipline reminds you of promises you've been making to yourself for years. Someone else's confidence quietly exposes how often you've doubted your own voice. None of that happens because they're trying to make you feel small. It happens because mirrors don't choose what they reflect. And this is why I think compassion matters so much. Because every confident person you admire was once uncertain. Every peaceful person once wrestled with fear. Every disciplined person once struggled to stay consistent. We only see the chapter they're living today. We rarely see the hundreds of quiet pages that came before it. Maybe that's why comparison can be so unfair. We're comparing someone else's finished chapter to a page we're still writing. And that's a comparison nobody wins. But here's where the story changes. Because discomfort doesn't stay discomfort forever. If someone refuses to face it, the mind quietly begins looking for relief. And that's the moment behavior starts changing. Not because they're evil, not because they're cruel, but because every uncomfortable feeling eventually searches for somewhere to go. And that's exactly where our story goes next. Let's stay inside that person's mind for a moment. They've just met you. They don't dislike you. They barely know you. But they can't ignore how your presence made them feel. Human beings don't like emotional discomfort. We naturally want to explain it. We want a reason, a cause, something that makes the feeling make sense. So the mind quietly begins asking, why do I feel like this? And if it can't find the real answer, sometimes it creates an easier one. And this is where something incredibly subtle happens. The mind begins changing the meaning without changing the facts. Yesterday, you seemed confident. Today, you seem full of yourself. Yesterday, you looked peaceful. Today, you look detached. Yesterday, you were disciplined. Today, you're obsessed. Did you actually change? Probably not. The story changed. And once the story changes, every new moment gets interpreted through it. You know what's fascinating? Most people don't wake up one morning and decide, I'm going to become distant. It happens quietly. They stop asking how you're doing. They stop celebrating your little victories. They interrupt a little more. They listen a little less. It's almost like your conversations have gone on a diet. Everything becomes shorter, smaller, lighter. Until one day, you suddenly realize the friendship doesn't feel like the same friendship anymore. And here's the realization that changed everything for me. Most insecure people aren't trying to become your enemy. They're trying to become comfortable again. That's a completely different thing. Sometimes criticizing feels easier than confronting. Dismissing feels easier than growing. Gossip feels easier than asking, why did their life make me question my own? Carl Jung believed that until we become conscious of what's happening inside us, those hidden patterns quietly shape our relationships. Put simply, if we don't understand our own discomfort, we often hand responsibility for it to someone else. And that's where so many misunderstandings begin. But here's the beautiful part. None of this means you should become suspicious of everyone. It means you finally have permission to stop carrying feelings that never belonged to you in the first place. And that is where real freedom begins. There's something I didn't understand for a very long time. I thought relationships only changed when people argued, or betrayed each other, or stopped caring. But life taught me something much quieter. Sometimes relationships change simply because one person keeps growing, while the other keeps standing in the same place. Nobody planned for it. Nobody wanted it. Yet one day, the conversations don't sound the same anymore. The laughter feels different. Even the silence feels different. Have you noticed, the more peaceful someone becomes, the more some people start calling them distant. The more confident they become, the more they're described as proud. The more disciplined they become, the more someone whispers, "They've changed." Well, of course they've changed. Isn't that what growth is supposed to do? The strange part isn't that people change. The strange part is how surprised we act when they do. It's a bit like planting an apple tree, then acting shocked because one day it isn't a seed anymore. Sometimes, the hardest people to grow around aren't strangers. They're the people who remember who you used to be. Family, childhood friends, people who genuinely love you, but still expect yesterday's version of you to walk through today's door. And when you don't, they aren't always reacting to who you've become. Sometimes, they're quietly grieving the role you no longer play in their life. That's painful, but it's also deeply human. Maybe that's why understanding matters more than winning, because once you understand what's happening, you stop trying to force people to see you differently. You stop defending every misunderstanding. You stop carrying every uncomfortable reaction home with you. You begin realizing something beautifully simple. Not every feeling another person has belongs to you. And that realization is one of the quietest forms of freedom you'll ever experience. There's just one last piece of this puzzle. Because understanding other people is valuable, but understanding what to do next, that's what changes your life. Can I tell you something that took me years to understand? You are responsible for your character. You're responsible for your choices. You're responsible for your words, but you are not responsible for every emotion your existence awakens inside another person. That's a burden no human being was designed to carry. Imagine trying to control the weather just because someone forgot an umbrella. It sounds impossible. Yet so many of us spend years trying to do something just as exhausting. We try to manage every opinion, every misunderstanding, every uncomfortable reaction, until one day we forget what it feels like to simply be ourselves. Looking back, I wish someone had told me this much earlier. Not every cold conversation means you failed. Not every awkward silence means you did something wrong. Not every person who misunderstands you is someone you need to convince. Some books simply aren't written for every reader. That doesn't make the book bad, and it doesn't make the reader bad either. It simply means not every story belongs to everyone. Human relationships can be a little like that. Carl Jung spent much of his life encouraging people to look inward before looking outward. Not because other people don't matter, but because that's the only place real freedom begins. Here's how I put it. If someone feels uncomfortable around your kindness, keep being kind. If someone feels uncomfortable around your honesty, keep being honest. If someone feels uncomfortable watching you grow, keep growing. Not to prove anything, not to make them feel worse, but because becoming yourself was never supposed to require permission from the people around you. So, what do insecure people really feel the moment they meet you? Sometimes nothing at all. Sometimes curiosity, sometimes admiration, sometimes inspiration. And sometimes your presence quietly touches a part of their story that still needs healing. That doesn't make them a bad person. It doesn't make you a perfect person. It simply reminds us that every human being is carrying an invisible conversation the rest of the world cannot hear. Maybe that's why kindness matters, because we never truly know what another person is fighting, but kindness should never require you to become smaller. You can be compassionate without abandoning yourself. You can understand people without carrying the weight of fixing them. And you can continue becoming the person you were meant to become, even if not everyone understands the journey, because at the end of the day, the most important conversation you'll ever have isn't the one people are having about you. It's the one you're having with yourself. Make sure that's the conversation you protect. Before you leave, I'd love to ask you one question. Has there ever been a moment when someone seemed uncomfortable around you, and only much later did you realize it probably had more to do with what they were carrying than with anything you had done? Share your story in the comments. Some of the most meaningful conversations in this community begin there. And if this film gave you a little more peace than you had when it started, I'd be honored to have you join me for the next one.